suddenly they were having to make decisions without me. I was making decisions. We were making different decisions. I didn't like the decisions they were making. They didn't like the way I handled the response. And all of a sudden, we were at odds in a significant way for the first time in history. They said some hurtful things. I said some hurtful things. It got bad, and all of a sudden, we've got the executive leadership that's really not trusting one another. I talked to my other friends, my senior pastors, consultants, who are like, hey, you just have to replace them. You can't have that, you can't tolerate it. And so I thought, I hate to do this, but that's what I'm going to have to do. Well, I prayed and prayed and prayed, and I really felt like God, even though I couldn't see the road to healing this relationship, even though it seemed like the road was too difficult and not worth it, I really felt like God led me to stay with the men who'd been faithful to help build this. And so it started with an apology on my part. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done this, and I should have done this, and I should have done that. And then it was followed by an apology on their part. And over a series of events through the next few months, we 100% rebuilt our trust. I want you to know it's extraordinarily rare to see any organization grow from 1,000 attenders to 50,000, one location to 15 locations, going on 18, with an executive group that stays together. It's one of the best decisions that I ever made to press through the pain, to have the hard conversations, to live through the awkwardness, to keep together a team that is now unparalleled in loyalty and understanding and faithfulness. They could have all left at any time and made more money somewhere else. Consulting, there's not a church in the world wouldn't want to pick those guys off. They decided to stay, and I decided to stay with them. Sometimes you're going to come to a place where it doesn't look easy. The road back seems like it's too difficult. And I'm here to tell you that God is going to call you to stay the course when you would rather go the other way. I want to ask you, in light of what God wants you to want, where do you need to stay? In light of the story that God wants you to tell, where do you need to stay the course when it seems so much easier to walk away? It could be in any number of different places. Some of you, you're in college right now and you think, I can't make it through. It's just too expensive, too time-consuming. The hill is too big, I can't climb it. And so you can do what a lot of people do, and it may be the right thing for you to do, which is just walk away and not finish. Or God may speak to you, hey, you're not a quitter, you're a finisher. And so you keep your head down, and you may work 2 jobs, and you may not be on the 4-year plan, you're on the 7.5-year plan, but you remain faithful. Semester after semester, you plow away. 1 class here, 2 classes there, a summer school class here, and one day you wake up and you realize you've got a degree. And your story is, it wasn't easy, but now I've got a job I couldn't have had otherwise because I am not a quitter, I'm a finisher, and I decided to stay when it would have been easier to quit. That might be your story. Some of you, it might be a problem that comes up in the church one day. You get your feelings hurt. Someone does something and you're like, well, forget them, forget that. Christians, they're all a bunch of hypocrites. Hey, let me just tell you what, the church is not perfect. And if you ever find a church that is perfect, whatever you do, don't join it. Because when your imperfect self comes, you'll screw it up. And so you get your feelings hurt. Well, I'm leaving the church. I'm going to show them. I'm walking away. I'm not staying in this stupid church thing. And that can be your story. It's a lot of people's story. Or I just stopped going to church and I got busy. I used to go to church, and that can be your story. Or you can say, you know what? They hurt me, but I'm going to do for them what Christ did for me. And I'm going to forgive. And I'm going to work through it. And I'm going to stay in there. And then years later is your story is like, hey, man, yeah, I got hurt, but, I forgave them and they forgave me, and, now we're close. And I'm so glad I stayed in the church because spiritually I'm in a place that I never was before. Now one of the high points of my life is making a difference in this world as the church of Jesus Christ. I don't go to church. I am the church. And my life is different because I decided to stay when it would have been easier to go. Some of you, your story will be with God. Something's going to happen in your life, and you don't like it. You don't understand it, and suddenly you're like, God, if you're going to let this happen when you could have stopped it, then forget you. And your story can be you walked away from God. Just like people all over the world. God, if you're going to let that happen, I can't believe in you. Or you might decide to stay with God, as God will always stay with you because he will never leave you nor forsake you. And so you tell him, I don't understand and this doesn't make sense to me, but God, I realize I'm not God and you are. So I'm choosing to believe in you even when I don't feel your presence. And then time goes on, something happens inside of you, and you start to look back at that thing that you hated, and you realize, I didn't know it at the time, but oh my gosh, God actually used that in my life to make me different. And what the enemy meant for evil, somehow God used for good. And now I know God and his faithfulness in a way that I didn't before. And now I'm living for him and for his glory in a way that I never thought possible. And this is my story, because I decided to stay with God when it would have been easier to walk away because I didn't understand. Some of you, it will be in your marriage. And let me spend a couple of moments here. And as I do, let me say two things before I talk about your marriage. Number one, I don't want to make you feel guilty about past chapters in your story because we can't change the past. Number two, if you're being abused, if someone is beating you, I'm not telling you to stay and be a punching bag. I'm telling you to get away where you can be safe, where you can be healthy, where they can become healthy, and then you can work on it in a healthy way. I'm not telling you to stay and let someone hit you. What I am saying is, over and over and over and over again in our society today, we see one or the other spouse say, well, I'm not very happy, so we might as well cash it in. Well, he's not meeting my needs, and the trainer at the gym, he sure compliments me a lot. Or she's kind of boring, and the girl at work, she's kind of fun, and so I'm walking away. He didn't make me happy. I mean, we gave it a shot for a little while, but it just didn't work out. When your marriage gets to that point of struggle, because they all get there because we're sinful people, you need to ask yourself, what story do you want to tell? Well, kids, we gave it a shot for a little while, but we just weren't happy. And that can be the story, and that's a lot of people's story. Or your story might go like this: we didn't like each other, we hated each other. We didn't believe in murder, so we just prayed the other one would die, okay? I mean, it was hell like you wouldn't believe. It is the worst thing ever. But you know what? We made a covenant before our God, so we hung in there, and we got counseling, and we got help, and we made church a priority, and we got a life group, and they spoke into our lives. And it didn't happen overnight, but over a period of time, God started to change us. And now we have a marriage. It's not perfect, but we've gone 27 years, kids, because we believe a covenant is something important, and God has given us something we didn't think was possible. Now, some of you are going to say, but Craig, you don't understand. He cheated on me, or she cheated on me. And adultery is grounds for divorce. So I can leave, right? Yes. Adultery is grounds for divorce. It's also grounds for forgiveness. And some of you may make a decision to stay when you had every right to go. And the best decision you ever make might be to stay when it was far easier to go. Some of you right now, you've been faithful for a long time. You're in the same boring job and you feel like a failure. You're raising the same boring kids and you feel like a failure. You're stuck in the same boring marriage and you feel like a failure. What I want you to hear is sometimes the greatest act of faith is faithfulness, staying where you're planted. And you may not see your Boaz immediately, but I'm telling you what, Galatians 6:9 says, do not grow weary in doing good, for at the proper time you will reap a harvest if you do not what? Somebody help me. If you do not give up. The decisions that we make today determine the stories that we tell tomorrow. And sometimes the best decision you can make is to stay. when it would be easier to go.